Welcome to the Sport and Peace Media Center at George Mason University School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution. Our intent here is to serve as an interactive platform for the sport, peace building, and development field. We plan to do this by highlighting individuals and research that contribute to the advancement of the field. In this endeavor, we will emphasize research and application initiatives. Today, we'd like to welcome Craig Esherick. He is the co-director and assistant professor of sport management at George Mason University. He's also a commentator for college basketball games. Craig was formerly the head coach of Georgetown University's men's basketball team, and he was also the assistant coach and scout for the 1988 U.S. Men's Olympics basketball team. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
I'd like to start off with a little bit more about your background. I guess a good place to start is, why were you attracted to sports? What was it about sports that drew you to it?
Well, when I was younger, I played basketball, football, baseball, and a little golf. And when I got about in 8th grade, I decided to focus on basketball. There was something about the sport that I really liked. There was something about the teamwork that I really liked. And I ended up being pretty good at it. And so I got a scholarship to Georgetown University. And over the course of the time that I played basketball, both at the high school level and college, what I noticed about the sport was that you had groups of people from all over the country, from different parts of Washington, D.C., that got together to play on a team. And it was different than hanging out with your friends, people that you were very similar with. There were different groups of people that got together to participate in the sport. And not only did I like the sport, but I liked the teamwork aspect of it. And that's also why I like coaching the sport too, is because you're bringing people from all over the world, from different socioeconomic backgrounds, to participate in an endeavor together to try and win. And the best teams are the ones that are able to work together, and that's the great thing about basketball. And I might also add that that's one of the reasons why it's one of the most popular sports in the world, is because it's a sport that requires teamwork, just like soccer. And soccer is the most popular sport in the world. And both of those sports are sports that, for teams to be good, there's got to be some teamwork.
Did your height have anything to do with basketball?
As somebody that is only 6'4", it did early on, but I became small once I got further and further up the chain. And certainly in college, I was at 6'4". I was not anywhere near the tallest guy on my team, but the position I played, my height did help me. My lack of speed hurt me, and so that's why I became a coach and became a professor, because I couldn't. But I wanted to play professional basketball, and I did as much as I could to become a professional basketball player. At the senior year of my college career, I realized that I was not going to become a pro, so I better figure out something else to do, and this whole coaching thing started right after that.
Good. Did you have a certain aha moment in your experience with sports and with working with teams that maybe you could say, oh, I could use, I'm not going to go into professional basketball, but I'm going to go in a slightly different direction using sports?
Well, two things probably. We went to Taiwan and Japan my junior year. Georgetown went and played. We practiced in Japan. We actually stopped in Hawaii and practiced a couple days. That was a rough trip, but you had to do it. And then we went to Japan, practiced again for a couple days, and then we played 8 games in Taiwan. And I had always liked to travel, but it was interesting seeing a different country. We were the first American college team that had played in Taiwan, and that was an interesting experience. It was an interesting cultural experience and educational experience for the whole team, and that probably started my curiosity not only about traveling, but also about different people and backgrounds, and, well, how do they become good at basketball in their country? What types of structures are set up? Do they have school teams? Do they have club teams? And so that, in 1977, that probably started my curiosity about, and it related to basketball, obviously, but my curiosity about how players are developed, how teams are developed outside the borders of the United States.
And just a little inserted question here. What would you think, what would you identify as being the most challenging thing going into a new environment in a sports setting, but in terms of relating to someone in their new culture and new system, so to speak?
The toughest thing, I think, when two groups are coming together, the very toughest thing is language.
Yeah.
And I think that if two groups speak the same language, there's much more communication. But in a sports setting, because the common language is the sport, that's why the State Department uses sports to try and bring people together, because it is much easier to develop relationships when two groups of people don't speak the same language. I spoke no Mandarin, I spoke no Chinese, but there was some communication between us and when we were in Japan with the Japanese students that we met, and when we were in Taiwan with the athletes we were competing against, because of the sport. Because of the sport, there was some level of communication and common understanding. Even though they were trying to win, we were trying to win, there was a common bond that was established by the sport of basketball.
I think that's one of the strengths of sport, personally. And it would be really neat to see us building our initiatives on that.
Well, I think, that with the whole thing with Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon opening up trade and relations with China, that whole thing got started with a silly little sport called table tennis or ping pong.
Ping pong.
And so I think it's a great way to introduce two groups together that may not know each other. It's a great way to try and bring two groups together that may not have the best of relations, and that's what we did with China, and see where we are now. How many Americans are in China doing business? We have consulates all over the country now. We have an embassy in China. They're in our country, and so that little exchange between two ping pong teams has created an awful lot.
Yep. How would you? Can you talk a little bit about your activities, academic and both sport-wise, that you've come across, either, sport management or?
I teach a full load. I'm a full-time professor at George Mason. I've been a full-time professor now. This is my 5th year. I also do some grant work with the U.S. State Department, and we've been doing that now for 3 years. We've traveled to several different countries. We brought athletes from all over the world to the United States. We actually have a group coming in today from the newly independent Southern Sudan. We don't just, my focus is on trying to develop coaches. It's not just basketball. My level of knowledge in terms of sport certainly is focused on basketball, but what we try and do is bring all sorts of sports. Mm-hmm. As you know, we brought some martial artists from Tajikistan. We had a group of wrestlers from Mongolia. We've had basketball coaches from China. We've had snowboarders, if you can believe it, from Kyrgyzstan. We've had sitting volleyball players who are volleyball players without 1 or 2 limbs that are able to still play the sport. They've developed a sport that permits them to be able to do it. Ice hockey athletes from Russia. We've had soccer players from literally around the world with different groups, soccer coaches from Swaziland. And then we have this group coming in today from the Southern Sudan, which is a bunch of basketball coaches. So it's pretty heady stuff. I think that the program that the State Department has set up really does a great job of introducing these groups of people to the United States. But I think sports enables a communication at the grassroots level between groups of coaches and groups of athletes that you may not be able to get at the ambassador level.
Sure. How about any publications?
I've written one book, and the book was something totally away from sport management, it's media relations in sport. And I wrote the book with a reporter who's a journalism professor at University of Mississippi and a sports information director at West Virginia. I am going to publish a book in February with the director of sport management at George Mason, Bob Baker. And that book will be out, and it's published by Human Kinetics, which is one of the largest publishers in our field. And then Bob and I just signed a contract with another publisher in Massachusetts to do a book on the art and science of coaching, which will be out in June of 2014.
Oh, great. I look forward to that. We can definitely...
I will accept your check or cash for the book. Thank you for offering.
Well, I was also thinking more in terms of another podcast together, so
Yes,
we'll
that too.
talk.
That too.
So it's obvious that you've done a lot of initiatives with different, touching on different areas of the globe, and with people who are disabled, and those who are not, or with language barriers. So a lot of things that you have to overcome in these initiatives. What would you say is the most one of the most important things that you can put your finger on and you say, this is something we need to improve in initiatives, in sport and peace or sport and development initiatives?
I would say, I would answer that question in two ways. I think the toughest thing for some of these groups that come over is to overcome the hurdle of economics in their country. When you have a country, when you have a group of coaches, group of athletes that are struggling to find facilities, struggling to find equipment, money becomes an issue in relation to developing a sports industry in a country. So Southern Sudan, they are facing that now. They're trying to build a country, and the last thing that they're worried about is whether they have a good basketball team or a good track and field team. But the two of them should be hand in hand. We're developing an educational system. Part of the educational system is to develop a group of citizens that understand exercise, and sport is part of exercise. But the other thing in all these initiatives, I think you have groups of people that go out and try and do things like this that may know a lot about conflict resolution, but know nothing about the value of sport. And then you have some groups that also go out and attempt to bring groups together that know sport, but don't know conflict resolution. And I think that education is on both ends of the spectrum. I think you have to educate the academicians that may not understand the value of sport or may not understand sport, but you also have to educate the coaches and athletes that go out that don't understand how to bring these two groups together, don't understand the buzzwords that you have to use when you're trying to use sport to bring groups together.
So essentially you're pointing at linking both the theory and application.
It's important to do that, and I think that there hasn't been enough written. I mean, you and I have talked about a textbook that is out now. I don't think there has been enough written. The second publisher that I've worked with, they have actually talked about coming out with a book on sport and development, sport and peace. And I think we need to come out with something like that. We need to come out with a book about a history book about how sport has been used for peace and development. But I also think we need to come out with a theoretical framework to do a better job in this field too, which is a completely different project.
And you hit it on the head here, because the topic of measurement and monitoring and evaluation of these programs is huge, because while especially those of us who do some kind of sports or martial arts or whatever, and we're in touch with people from different cultures, we understand the value on an experiential level. But we end up having to answer to questions like, well, how is this sustained? How is this commonality that we've built sustained? And so I think starting with a theoretical background and really merging those two fields, application and theory, will help us to figure out how can we measure something like
I
this.
totally agree, and I think it'll also help the State Department, but it'll also help people like you and I that are interested in using sports, because everyone needs funding, just as these countries that come in and bring their athletes and coaches.
Sure.
They need equipment, they need facilities, but people that do programs like this need to find either funding from the government or funding from the corporate world. But people are not going to give. We're all in where everyone has to deal with a tough economy right now.
Right.
The resources are not there, and so we all have to do a better job of convincing people that this has value. The State Department has to do that every day. They have to go before Congress and justify their budget. And so part of their budget is the Sports United program that brings athletes and coaches here and sends athletes and coaches from our country to other parts of the world. And literally every year they have to go up on the Hill and say, this program is good, and why is it good? And I think we can help that with these types of books, these types of academic studies. I think will help people like that, like the State Department, like Sports United, justify why they're spending this kind of money, because you look at a group of coaches coming over this country and it's a nice trip and they enjoy the United States, but you have to justify why they're coming over here, what type of programs are they involved in, what are they learning, what types of things about the United States are they bringing back to their country, and what are we learning about them? Sure. Because it's a two-way,
yep,
it's literally a cultural exchange, and everyone that has worked on our grant with these groups, we learn just as much from the groups that come over as they learn from us.
Absolutely.
And there's got to be a continuation of that learning too.
Would you say that in terms of justification of these programs, that qualitative or quantitative approach toward justifying the evidence in what sport can do?
We do a pre and post test with every group that comes in. The State Department has done a really good job of pushing the importance of doing a study with each group. And so we do almost a focus group when the groups are getting ready to leave the country. And I think that the next study that can be done, and it's going to be much more difficult and more expensive, is once they go home,
yes,
what impact has this trip had? What are they doing in their country? What have they learned? What type of programs have they established because of what they've learned here? And what are we doing? How have we changed in this country with the group that came from Kyrgyzstan? What have we done to alter some of the stuff that we've done with these groups and the group from China? What types of things have we learned from them too? All those things I think need to be studied.
Yeah, I would agree. Can I move a little bit now more towards your personal goals for the field? What would we've talked about, linking theory and application, we've talked about measurement, we've talked about qualitative, quantitative, and perhaps that, a mix of both of those, that kind of evidence would serve the best. So what would you personally like to see happen going forward?
That's a good question, and had a couple years to think about that. I think a great thing for this university, George Mason University, and I think a great thing for the continuation of the work that the State Department has done and the work that a lot of people have done in this field is to establish a center, to establish some form of a center for sport leadership, a center for sport leadership and community development, a center for sport leadership and peace development. And I think we are in the perfect location. We're in Washington, D.C. We are very close to many institutes, many governmental, non-governmental organizations that I think we can learn from and can learn from us. And we're in the same metropolitan area as the U.S. State Department.
Correct. And
so I think this would be a great thing for the university to do, and I think we would add real value to some of the things that the State Department is trying to do. And as we started out, sport is as much as any other way that the State Department tries to interact with other groups, other countries. I think sport is about the best way to connect. Mm-hmm. And so I think as a government we can spend more money on this, not less. And I think that these programs have worked. I think if you look at private business like the NBA, like the NFL, like a Nike, like Under Armour, they are trading and doing business all over the world too, and they do community type things to benefit their companies.
Sure.
But this community building that these private enterprises are engaged in, I think we can tap into also.
And would you also say that it's important to tap into, I think you've already alluded to this, but tap into the university and academics and developing the field in that way also?
When you bring the industry into academia and you bring academia into the industry, I think the two of them can help each other. I think we can make them, when NBA goes and does a program in South Sudan, or when the NFL is trying to develop football in China, they can learn from some of the things that the State Department has done, and they can learn from some of the studies that professors have engaged in to try and bring groups together for business reasons too, not just for conflict resolution, sure, but also to increase the likelihood of two different groups of people doing business together.
Sounds good to me.
I think it's a great project. It's fun, and we enjoy engaging with these groups, and I think it's a great way to make a living.
Well, I look forward to February and June when I can, we have another podcast and I can buy your book.
Very good.
And
I'll sign it for you too.
thank you very much. And
Just don't hit me.
I'm very peaceful. Unless you give me a
Did you
reason.
get that?
Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
And this concludes our session with Craig Esherick. Thank you so much for joining in. Stay tuned for next time.